Uh, Friday, August 30th. First, of course, is go Buffaloes. We will shatter Colorado State in about another 3.5 hours. Football aside, the world changed at the very beginning of August, and here we are at the very end. During the month of August, the first tariff spasm was on the 1st itself. The Fed met on the 31st of July and said, everything's fine in here, we're going to cut a quarter point, just mid-course correction, nothing to it. The next day, we announced tariffs on China by surprise to the world and triggered a cascade. Mortgage rates and long-term interest rates, treasury rates, all fell 0.5% this month, and really did it in just 3 weeks. Oddly enough, the stock market's the same as it was. There's rhyme to this music. The stock market's okay because the stock market expects the Fed to ease, which it now probably will, which it was not going to. Last Friday was round 2 tariff spasm, which China started this time in a delayed retaliation against our tariffs on July 1st. China announced new ones on Friday, and then we announced huge new ones later that same day. This week, everybody's exhausted, and everybody's waiting for something to happen. The things that have already happened, the outside world is clearly slowing. Germany's in recession. China's in worse shape than its public information would say, and it actually may be contracting. The world's central banks have either cut their interest rates already and a lot and intend to cut more, and the shoe that hasn't dropped is the first piece of negative economic news from overseas to wind up in the United States. We don't have it yet. There are a lot of people in the media who squawk about weak housing numbers. They're not weak. Demand is in perfectly good shape. Credit is cheap and unlimited if you qualify. Housing numbers are thin on a historical basis because we have a huge migration underway of people from the countryside to cities. In the countryside there aren't any jobs and there isn't any fun. In cities there are all these IT jobs and all kinds of fun that's just down the block. But the problem in cities is that they have exhausted their developable land, and we're in a long, painful process in urban areas across the country to rezone to higher densities to accommodate the people who want to move in from the countryside. But there's no problem with demand. There's nothing that would indicate a recession underway because of housing. We're waiting for trade-linked things to wash up dead on our beaches. Perhaps the leading analytic problem is that we haven't had a trade war. There hasn't been a meaningful trade war in the world since the 1920s. After the 1920s, we had that unpleasantness in the 1930s, and then there was that little World War II thingy. And ever since 1945, the world has been reducing tariffs, opening trade, freeing trade. And so for the first time, we're entering a trade war in a new and modern economy. We don't know the sequence of events. We don't know the linkage. We don't know how one thing follows on another. Mortgage rates are scattered between 3.5 and 4, depending on the product and the hour of the day. Jumbos are in disarray. The supply chains of mortgages are choked up with refinances. But one thing I will testify to, at the sign of the first genuinely weak U.S. economic data traceable to trade overseas, there's no bottom to U.S. interest rates. The fear of negative interest rates is spreading even to here. And I have no idea even how to handicap the matter. The European Central Bank meets on September 9. The Fed meets on the 18th. Next week, after Labor Day, we get a slew of new economic data. We get the jobs report from August. Most likely that stuff is okay. Manufacturing will be weak because it's tied to overseas. But the current real-time U.S. economic data is still okay. Hence the freeze in interest rates in the last week, waiting for something to happen. Is all of this cause for worry? Not particularly. It makes pretty good theater. What's the chance that China or the United States blink? Zero. Mr. Trump isn't going to blink. China's not going to blink. Something has to happen to make them blink, and that's not at hand. So with all of that, we've got a 3-day weekend ahead. We have a great deal of college football. Don't forget to pay attention to your families. Gardening, time to put the yard to bed, stuff like that. But in the meantime, we're sitting here on a 3-year low for mortgage rates, likely to go lower. And all of the reasons that could be bad news are across an ocean somewhere. To enjoy the weekend.